In the opening scenes, we see boys in an orphanage. One of them stands out by having 3 marks on his foot. Notary Jeanne Lebel read the will of Mrs. Nawal Marwan to her children, twins Simon and Jeanne Marwan. According to the will, all her property and money were to be divided equally between her son and daughter. Nawal also did not want a gravestone to be set up for her, nor did she wish for any funeral service. That was her final wish. But that's not all. Nawal instructed the notary to hand a letter to her children, who in turn were to find their father and deliver the letter to him. There's another letter for the twins' brother. Only after this, the son and daughter can set up a gravestone on their mother's grave and engrave her name. The brother and sister were perplexed as they knew nothing about their father and brother. Jeanne Lebel, who had always been very close to the Marwan family, admits that this is unusual. Among other things, Nawal left a 3rd envelope with her cross and her old passport inside. Simon can no longer bear it. He is not willing to comply with their mother's strange wishes, believing that the funeral should proceed as is appropriate. Jeanne reacted more reservedly. Either their mother is insane, or she has indeed kept dark secrets all her life. The brother and sister ponder on what to do next. Simon still intends to have a normal burial, contrary to their mother's will. However, Jeanne doubts if that's the right thing to do. After all, it's their mother's will. Jeanne is an assistant professor at the university and teaches mathematics. Later, she spoke to Professor Nif Cohen, who believes that she should find out everything about their father and brother, otherwise, her soul will never be at peace. Jeanne said that her father perished during the war. The professor in turn said that it's an unknown in the equation. Nobody ever starts with an unknown. Jeanne's mother often mentioned a certain village. In the past, Nawal studied at the university to become a French language teacher in Daresh. The professor advised Jeanne to meet Sedadar, his old friend, in Daresh. He's the person Jeanne can trust. At home, Jeanne rummaged through her things and found a photograph of the mother in her youth. She is determined to uncover the secrets of the past, but Simon does not share her aspirations. Jeanne's life will never be the same again. She recalls how the mother began to lose herself in space and time. Soon after that, Nawal was admitted to the hospital. The doctor examined her but never gave a final diagnosis. Nawal simply didn't respond to anything and seemed absent. Nawal's fate was tough because she grew up in strict Muslim traditions. She was in love with a refugee. When her brothers found out about their secret relationship, they were furious. Ultimately, one of them took the life of her beloved. Since Nawal dishonored the family's honor, she too had to pay. The grandmother did not allow her grandsons to do so. Nevertheless, she also considered her granddaughter a disgrace. It was a stigma for the entire life. In tears, Nawal confessed that she was pregnant. Now there's no turning back. Nawal fell into depression and refused to eat. The grandmother persuaded her for a long time to eat for the sake of the baby. The grandmother also wants Nawal to go to her uncle's after giving birth. There, Nawal can go to school and get an education. This is her only chance to escape poverty. Nawal promised her grandmother that she would go to school. Several months passed. Nawal's belly had grown very large. Tonight, she gave birth at home. The grandmother helped her with everything. The baby was marked with 3 dots on the foot. Nawal knows she must part with her son. There is no other choice. But Nawal promised him that she would find him someday. The grandmother took the baby away from home. In the present, Jeanne, as the professor advised, found Saeed Adar, but he couldn't help her because 35 years ago, he wasn't teaching here. However, Jeanne is not going to give up. She managed to find out that her mother worked at the university newspaper a long time ago. She also learned that the photo of her mother was taken in Faryat, a prison in the southern part of the country. In the past in Lebanon, which was in a state of civil war, riots began. Nationalists were intent on getting refugees deported from the country. But the worst part was that the nationalists occupied the university. Nawal was scared, as were all the others. The uncle instructed her and his daughters to stay at home. The situation continued to worsen. As the university and schools were closed, the uncle intended to take his family away from here tomorrow. However, Nawal wants to stay to find her son. She thinks about her child every day and won't rest until she knows what happened to him. In the morning, lying to her uncle that she was going to fetch water, Nawal ran away. She took a bus south to visit the only 2 orphanages in the area. To pass through a checkpoint, Nawal lied to the military that she planned to visit her husband. Due to the country being in chaos, movements of all citizens are strictly controlled. For the first time in many years, Nawal returned to her homeland. However, she was disappointed because the local shelter housed only girls. The boys had been moved long ago. Now, the girls are also being evacuated because it's becoming too dangerous to stay in the village. Nawal is upset, yet continues forward. She walked past ruined houses, failing to find the orphanage. According to the few remaining locals, boys had been relocated somewhere. Feeling helpless, Nawal cried. Her search led to nothing. Later, she walked along the road and saw an approaching bus. Nawal quickly covered her head with a scarf to appear as a devout Muslim. The bus was heading to the camp where the residents had taken refuge. Nawal dozed off, and when she woke up, the bus was standing still. Nawal immediately sensed that something was wrong. Moments later, the bus came under fire. Nawal was one of the few survivors. After a few more minutes, the bus was doused with fuel. This forced Nawal, as well as another woman with a child, to show themselves. Showing her cross, Nawal shouted that she was a Christian. Realizing that the other woman couldn't escape, Nawal pretended to be the mother of the little girl, hoping to save her. However, the girl kept calling for her mother, revealing the deception. Ultimately, Nawal was not allowed to take the girl with her. She sat on the ground near the burning bus, oblivious to everything around her. In the present, Jeanne continues her search, which has led her south. It's in this village that Nawal was born. Jeanne showed the photograph of her mother to the locals, hoping that someone would shed light on her mother's history. But hardly anyone here speaks French, complicating her search. It turns out that many people from the Marwan family live here. Jeanne explained that she's from Canada and came to find her father. Jeanne only knew that his name was Wahab. Seeing Nawal's photo, local women reacted aggressively, shouting that Nawal was a disgrace to the family. Nobody said anything to her about Wahab. The women also made it clear that Nawal Marwan's daughter was not a welcome guest here. In the past, Nawal noticed distant explosions. Her country was in chaos due to the civil war. Nawal spent the night in an abandoned house. Finally, Nawal arrived at the refugee camp, hoping to find answers here about her son. Nawal has nothing more to lose, her hatred for the nationalists is boundless. Nawal's uncle believed that peace could be upheld through words and books, but life taught Nawal something entirely different. Now she wants to teach her enemies what life taught her. For cover, Nawal became a French teacher in the city. One day she was tutoring a boy, as usual. His father was a key figure among the nationalists. Nobody knows that Nawal hides a gun in her bag. Meanwhile, the family was having breakfast in the courtyard. Nawal went to them and fired several shots. Of course she was quickly captured. Nawal found herself in the place where all terrorists end up. Her hair was cut, and she was left in a cramped cell. In the present, Jeanne visited Fariat prison, which has now become a museum. There were over 600 political prisoners here. This is where Nawal's photo was taken, but the museum employee doesn't know who the woman is. Those events were a long time ago, and there's hardly any information about the prisoners. Following the museum employee's advice, Jeanne found Wahim Hars, a school watchman. Showing him her mother's photograph, Jeanne explained that she was looking for someone who could tell about her. Wahim indeed recognized Nawal. She's the singing woman, number 72. It was her who attacked the leader of the far-right group. She was called the singing woman because she always sang. In the past, Wahim was a warden and watched over Nawal for 13 years. Despite everything, she did not break. Also according to Wahim, Nawal became pregnant in prison. The father of the child was the interrogation specialist Abu Tariq, who had been trying to break Nawal all this time. Wahim doesn't know anything about Nawal's further fate, but he advised Jeanne to find a nurse in Daresh who delivered Nawal's baby. What Jeanne heard horrified her. She called Simon and told him everything she had learned. Jeanne is convinced that their mother gave birth to their brother in prison. In the past, Nawal used to sing in her cell to drown out the cries of other inmates. In the present, Simon met Jeanne Lebel again to understand where his sister is now. Jeanne Lebel doesn't want to let Simon go alone, so he plans to go with him. The day before, Jeanne Lebel had come to the ward to see Nawal, who was whispering something. He leaned in, and after hearing her last wish, wrote the will. This threw Jeanne Lebel into confusion. He had no idea what his old friend had been through. In the past, Nawal was once again brought to Abu Tariq, the interrogation specialist. Nawal has always remained indifferent. After some time, Nawal realized that she was pregnant. She tried to prevent it by all means, but in vain. When the time came, Nawal gave birth to twins. The nurse wanted to help Nawal, so she secretly saved her son and daughter from a terrible fate of dying in the river. Simon and Jeanne Lebel arrived in Lebanon. Simon thought they were only here to find his sister, but Jeanne Lebel wants to help uncover the secrets of their family's past. Jeanne is genuinely happy to see her brother. She managed to find out the name of the nurse who attended the birth and that she is currently in the hospital. Perhaps this will help them find their elder brother. Jeanne, Simon and Jeanne Lebel arrived at the hospital. Micah is very ill but agreed to talk to the visitors. Upon hearing the name Nawal Marwan, Micah couldn't contain her emotions. At that moment, Jeanne and Simon realized with horror that they were the ones born in prison. Abu Tariq was their father, not their brother's father. It turns out that after Nawal was released from prison, Micah returned the children to her. For the brother and sister, what they heard was shocking. They were not prepared for such a truth. In the next scenes, we see a sniper with 3 marks on his foot cleaning the city streets. He knows neither pity nor doubt. Jeanne Lebel didn't know much about Nawal Marwan, who worked as his secretary for 18 years. Jeanne and his wife had grown very fond of Nawal and her children, but the woman, as it turned out, carefully concealed her past. With the help of a private detective, they managed to find out that after the war, Abu Tariq disappeared. Perhaps he fled abroad. As for the brother, the private detective found out that in 1970, Nawal's grandmother placed him in an orphanage. After the war, most of the records were lost, but the detective managed to find something. According to the records, the boy was named Nihad. Jeanne Lebel sees this as a victory. Perhaps they are close to answers as never before. From the detective, they also learned that 4 years later, the orphanage was destroyed. This is where Nihad's trail ends. Perhaps he is no longer alive. Simon wants to open the envelopes meant for the brother and father, but Jeanne won't allow it, considering it sacrilege. The detective advised them to find the leader of the group responsible for the destruction of the shelter. His name is Walat Shamsuddin. Following the detective's advice, Simon and Jeanne, accompanied by a trustworthy person, arrived at the refugee camp. Jeanne did not go with them. It was her brother's turn to continue the search. Also, on the detective's advice, Simon and Jeanne accepted invitations for tea from everyone around. Simon mentioned that he is the son of the singing woman and is searching for someone named Nihad. Upon hearing about the singing woman, everyone fell silent. However, Simon was soon visited in his motel room by 2 men who said they could help if he went with them right away. This seemed suspicious to Simon, so he called the private detective for advice. The detective assured him that there was nothing to worry about. Simon agreed to go with these people. In the past, Nawal was released from prison after 15 years of imprisonment. Now she and her children need to leave for another country to start a new life. A certain person wants to help Nawal with this. In the present, Simon was taken somewhere blindfolded. He was informed that it was for his own safety. Walat Shamsuddin asked what he could help with. Simon explained that he was looking for his brother. After that, all the outsiders left the room, and Simon was allowed to open his eyes. Walat Shamsuddin said that many years ago, he and his friends raided a village in response to the devastation of refugee settlements. Walat Shamsuddin saved all the boys, including Nihad. They were used to make first-class soldiers. Nihad became a professional sniper. Legends circulated about his cruelty and heartlessness. More than anything, Nihad longed to find his mother but never could. This made him even more ruthless. During another skirmish, Nihad was captured. But thanks to his skills, he was trained and sent to work at the Fariat prison. There, Nihad adopted a new name, Abu Tariq. All the details that Simon learned about his birth deeply depressed him. When Jeanne learned that their brother was also their father, she screamed. In Canada, many years after her release, Nawal Marwan, swimming in the pool, saw a man with 3 marks on his foot. This sparked certain thoughts in her. This man turned out to be Abu Tariq. He didn't recognize the singing woman. But Nawal had just realized a terrible truth. Perhaps all this time, her son was closer than she thought. Jeanne was crying. Neither she nor Simon were evidently prepared for such truth. Perhaps some secrets are better off remaining secrets. It's known that Abu Tariq is currently living in Canada under another name, Nihad Armani. He is an ordinary working man. In the street, Jeanne and Simon called out to him, handing envelopes. Nihad has no suspicion about who's in front of him. Jeanne was watching everything carefully from the car. Later, Nihad opened both envelopes intended for the father and son. In her first letter, Nawal told her children's father about the twins. When Nihad realized that he had just spoken to his own children, he chased after them, but by then Jeanne and Simon were already gone. In her second letter, Nawal told her son that she had been searching for him all her life. Despite everything, she loves him. Nihad was horrified to realize that prisoner number 72 was his mother. As Simon and Jeanne fulfilled the mother's wishes, Jeanne Lebel could pass on her farewell letter to them. Now that the brother and sister know the truth, it is hard for them to do so. Their mother only wanted them not to succumb to anger and continue living. Their story began with horrors, but they are all that Nawal had, along with her elder son. In the final scene, we see Nihad visiting the mother's grave.